Host Christene Marie, and tonight we are talking about reality. We're tackling a very big topic this evening, and it's one that warrants kind of a slow pace and a slowing into, I guess, kind of like an easing into the conversation. Because when we consider reality, I am not at all taking the perspective or the stance of a philosopher, but more so from a layperson, a normal human who has experienced moving through various understandings of what is real and what's true and what do I believe, and there's been a whole evolution that I've moved through in just 32 years. And I want to share some of that with you tonight, as I think all of us, as we continue to experience life. It's like the greatest teachers, the greatest sayings always go, the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know. And if we're willing and giving ourselves permission to evolve, then we actually have the freedom to ask ourselves these questions, yes, but then continue to iterate on them, which means that we're effectively ongoing in terms of the search, in terms of the questioning, in terms of the exploration of the truth. Because when we exist in a box where it's preset for us and we crawl into it, maybe our name is written on the box, and our parents or pastors or priests or peers say, hey, exist in there. This is who we want you to be. When we exist in that box, it is near impossible to explore, because we have a very confined set of walls and rules and principles that we have to abide by, and there's not much exploration. It's almost like already been done for us. But if we're coming into something new and there are no walls and there are no boxes, then there's so much freedom for us to explore what can be, and explore the possibility of truth and experience. And it's so exciting. And so tonight's conversation, really leaning into the concept of the stories we abide by and the stories we live in. And why does reality actually feel like a heavy thing, like a heavy topic, and a heavy pursuit? That's what I want to talk about tonight. So when I say reality, I'm not talking about moral absolutes. I'm talking about my experience with the world and your experience with the world. And what does it really look like for us to come toe to toe with each other and really pursue a true knowing of reality? And I think it's actually really important. I wasn't planning to go in this direction, but I want to. The why is so critical. I've been thinking about the why a lot as we come to the end of the year, end of 2025, our why for our business and our why for our families, our why for everything we do. As we're planning 2026, our why matters so incredibly much, and it matters every day. But when we come to the end of the year, it's just a really good opportunity to hold up a mirror and look in it and be like, why am I living this way? And so, as we consider the why to this question of why does reality feel so hard, and the stories that we live in, and what stories are we telling ourselves, why does this topic even matter? And so, I want to lean into that with you. And for those of you joining, thank you for your patience with me. I have been sick for the last 5 days. Um, and actually, my throat hurts a little bit. So, I'm actually just going to take a sip of water. I have been slowly losing my voice. But I think the why is really important for us to consider, because if not, we're going to be, it's like the concept of two rocket ships on the landing pad. Then you take off, and if I have a different why I'm talking, and different terminology, and different ultimately a different foundation, I'm going to head in a different direction, and you're going to head in a different direction. And so even though we start at the same place, as I talk and I'm being motivated by a reason, and I'm using different words, and I'm like very much so going in a direction because our why propels us in the direction that we're aiming. So if you have a different why than I do, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with our two different whys. But if we don't acknowledge it, what will end up happening is that we're like ships in the night and we're wondering why you're not understanding me and I'm not understanding you. And there's confusion and it's kind of chaotic. And so I want to kind of bring us back home for why does this conversation about reality even matter to begin with? And there's a plethora, there's an abundance of reasons why this conversation matters, but what I wanna lean into tonight with you is that why knowing and being aware of reality matters is because right here, right now, here in this present moment, this is so man, it's so beautiful, it's so important. There's so much opportunity in the now. And if we don't really know, if we're not living awake, if we're not living aware, then the now is actually going to pass us by. It's the whole concept of living so much in the future or living in a whole different kind of reality. My well, someone I know very well and someone I love very much said this concept. They were like, effectively, if you were to be so spiritually minded that you're of no earthly good. I thought that that was such a clever concept because we all know people like that, people who exist in the church or in the temple, and they're just so dedicated to being spiritual or religious, but they don't know how to do the laundry and they don't know how to take care of the kids and they don't know how to cook. And it's just like the basics of survival. And so as we consider why does learning about how to experience our own engagement with the world. There's something about that I never really grew up awake. I never grew up aware. I lived with this like disconnect from my own experience. And it was like I was watching everyone else live through the world and engage with the world. And I would have almost like engaged with the world through their experience. And thinking about it now, it's kind of very strange, but I really did. Like, I really lived vicariously through other people. And as I have come to know my own experience, I have come to, yes, love and enjoy life. So the now is so important in terms of its beauty and the opportunity that's there. But in addition, I have come to really take a hold of the responsibility that is mine for my own experience, for my own existence in the world. And so, if we're not aware of our own reality, if we're not aware of our own experience, what it does is that it actually almost like abdicates. It's like we throw off our responsibility. We discard our own our own choice, the power of choice over the decisions we make, over how we engage with other people, over how we show up. And so, this question of why does reality matter in the first place? Why does this conversation need to take place, anyways? It's because, yes, there's so much beauty and life to engage in and to enjoy, but there's also so much of our present moment that we need to take responsibility for. We need to take responsibility for ourselves because every single one of us has a very distinct reason why we're here, why we were created, why we exist in this world with the experience that we've had and the family that we came from. There is no accident, there's no oopsie. And so, if we are to really understand our reality, we then also understand the meaning that's there. And we may not understand all of the meaning right now, but by way of pursuing understanding and by way of pursuing the knowledge and the knowing of reality and our experience with it, it's like the whole world just the top on the lid that we've the lid of the box that we've been existing in for the last 2, 3, 4 decades just blows off and the walls blows off and we're like, wow, what the heck? Like this is such an amazing world that I live in. And yes, there's so much opportunity for us to enjoy it. And yes, there's so much opportunity for us to take radical responsibility for the reason why we're here in the first place. So those are my why for this conversation to begin with. And so now that we've established a semblance of a foundation, now we can get started into diving into the stories that we live in that hold so much power over us. And even moving beyond that, you know, so many of us think that we're actually responding to right here, right now. But in reality, we're responding to the lens through which we see the world. I consider this, you know, when I think about the way that so many of us engage, I take my experience and many other people that I've worked with in the knowing retreats and talked with in the knowing dinners. I've been doing like this little, I guess, human study over the last year, and it's been really interesting. You know, I've come to learn so much just by way of hearing and listening to other people. And what I've come to see is that we all have like a preset dials that we view the world, and that those dials were twisted and adjusted by our parents in childhood, by our teachers in adolescence, by peers, by moments and stories. And honestly, a lot of them are unprocessed. A lot of them actually held pain for us back in childhood or youth that we've never actually moved through. But what it did do was that it gave us a set of interpretations around the world, around other people, around God, and about ourselves. And so we think right here, right now, we're responding to reality, when in actuality, we're responding to the interpretations we developed literally as a child. So a lot of our interpretations in the way that we see the world are actually childish. And I mean that in the most loving way. You know, there's something really actually quite loving when we actually start recognizing, man, that was just little Christine, or that was little Aaron, or little Sam, or little Avery, who developed this lens and interpretation in the world. Gia, thank you so much for joining tonight. Um, Little Gia, you know, what are the interpretations that we have from childhood that we've carried over into today? And so, with that, we really need to be giving ourselves a good one big moment of grace. We need to give ourselves a pause to recognize that the way that I'm interpreting this moment, I'm actually using a lens and a dial that was preset when I was 8 years old. And then we have to ask, well, why was that dial or lens set back then? What happened? What's the why there? Just as the why for this conversation was important, we need to establish the why for this preset dial or this preset lens. Why does this interpretation exist in the first place? And then when we kind of do the work and explore the why, a lot of times there's a story there. A lot of times there's a story and a moment that happened back 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago that really impacted us. And a lot of times they were very small stories. They weren't big or dramatic or massive. Sometimes they are, you know, sometimes it was our parents divorcing, or sometimes it was dad walking out the door. Other times it was sitting there watching our parents fight. Other times it was feeling really left out by our siblings, not feeling wanted, not feeling loved. Other times it was being at school and, you know, you go up to the batting mound and you hit the ball and you actually don't know the rules of the baseball, I guess, what do they call bases? And then you run and people are laughing, and then you never pick up a baseball bat ever again. All of those stories hold a weight on us and hold an impact. Every single one of those stories shapes and adjusts the dials with which we see the world. And if we don't recognize that, our default which was established in childhood, is going to show up today. Tonight, I was having dinner with my sister and we were talking about, she actually was saying, I don't think childhood has much in part to play in adulthood. We actually have so much power over who we are today. We have full choice, we have full power, we have full control over the decisions we make. She was talking about from her experience how she's really shaped herself. So much of her education in childhood wasn't really that great. She didn't end up going to school. She was homeschooled and it just wasn't really that good of education. So now today she's very much so an academic and she's really proud of the fact that she's made herself that way. And I was listening to her and I really agree. We have so much power. We really have the ability to influence, impact, and shape who we want to be today. But what I offered in terms of and in addition to what she was saying is I think childhood holds power when we have not done the work to consider what is our default, because every single one of us has a default. Every single one of us has a default auto-programmed lens through which we view the world, view other people, view ourselves, make decisions. Our behaviors reflect that. And if we don't recognize our default, recognize the autopilot, then otherwise the past does have full power. But if we want our present moment to reflect something new, to reflect something different, we have to go back, understand those stories, and thus free ourselves. And part of freeing ourselves, y'all, in terms of being able to see right here, right now for what it really is, not colored from the past, so much of that is being able to return to the stories back then and really, man, take care of that little kid, you and me, who formed that interpretation to begin with. And a lot of times those interpretations were formed because we weren't getting our needs met. We looked around for someone to take care of us and no one was there. That doesn't mean our parents were terrible. And even as I've been writing the book Knowing that's going to be coming out this spring, my mom has read, I think, every iteration of the book. And she and I have had to talk through the fact that I loved my childhood. I man, she made us feel so loved. And what a blessing that is. And I also developed a set of narratives around the world based on those moments when she wasn't perfect and when my dad wasn't perfect and when the world wasn't perfect. So in addition to how wonderful she was, there were still moments that were painful or hard. And in those hard, painful moments, we actually have to go back and return to them and just really kind of love on that little kid and extend a lot of grace and compassion to that little kid, because otherwise, that little kid is still there and it's still wanting to get tended to and get its needs met. And so, apart from returning with intention to that little kid, that is going to remain our default. And it's like the little kid is fighting for a voice. And I actually heard this. My partner and I were in therapy probably a year ago. He and I were sitting with our therapist, and she said something really profound. She said, it's really a beautiful thing when you do start fighting. And I was like, "What? Why is it a good thing when we start fighting in relationships?" Because fighting when I was a kid was never a positive. And she said, "The reason why it's beautiful and it's actually a really profound thing is because you're actually feeling safe enough for that little kid to come out and start sharing its voice. It's now voicing its needs for the first time in probably a really long time." And so, in relationships where we do feel safe, we're no longer suppressing and silencing our needs. We're actually giving a voice to them. And so, the thing that's really, honestly, there's something, it's almost like an honor, to go back with intention, even when we're not in the midst of conflict, but to go back for our own sake with our own selves and go back and sit in some of those hard, painful moments. Some of the things that have been most helpful for me, I had a moment a couple years ago, and I'm just gonna take another drink. I was in Whole Foods 2 days ago, last night, and I was checking out, and all of a sudden I just got this tickle in my throat, and I could not stop coughing, and I was like so awful. So thanks for bearing with me while I drink my water. um, I had this moment 2 years ago where someone looked at me a particular way, and it was odd. I don't think this has ever happened before, but they looked at me with just this aggression and this it was just this look that reminded me of being 8 years old with my dad when my dad was mad, and in that moment, being 30 years old, and all of a sudden I'm 8. And y'all, every single one of us has that type of visceral reaction if we're not proactively returning to the past moment when that story happened and tending to it. And so what I did when that happened was I excused myself. I just said, I'm actually, I'm going to go for a little walk, everybody. Not a big deal. Nobody knew that I was having a flashback. And I walked outside, went for a little walk, and I actually sat down and I journaled. I just talked into my phone. It wasn't like I had my notebook and a pencil, but the same concept. And I just typed into my phone on my notebook. I have a notebook for every single month where I will write in the morning and journal in the morning on my laptop. And then I also have it on my phone so that if I want to journal throughout the day, it's right there. And I processed the entire thing. Why did I feel this way? What was the moment and the story in the past? You know, do I even remember a specific moment? Or was it just when I was a kid, I just vaguely remember having those kind of encounters with my dad? What did he do? How did I feel? How did I react? How did those around me react? And then what was the consequence of it? And what narrative, what story do I now hold about myself and about the world? Because here's the thing, so often these stories are actually having more to do with us than anyone else. And so when we react in a really big way, so often it's because we feel exposed, we feel vulnerable, we feel unsafe. We actually feel like frightened that we're going to stop receiving the love and connection that we really really need. So much of the human pursuit is to be in connection with other people and to receive love and feel wanted and feel like they belong. And so when we actually get to the heart of so many of these stories, a lot of time there's fear there. A lot of times there's fear over the rejection that might follow if someone sees us as we really are. And so in those moments, little Christine, for me specifically, was afraid that maybe it is true. Maybe it is true that I'm not worthy of love. Maybe it is true that I'm not lovable. Maybe it is true that, so there's a fear there. And so then going back to this example of someone who looked at me a particular way, intentionally going back to that moment after journaling and kind of moving through that, this is what I had to do. I had to ask myself, what do I know to be true now? And what I knew to be true now is my dad really does love me. And I know to be true that my dad did struggle with anger. I know to be true that it actually didn't have much to do with me when he was struggling with anger during that time. And I know to be true he loved my siblings too. And I know to be true that he's a good dad. And I know to be true that, so it was, okay, let me teach my nervous system after I've listened to it, after I've let it calm down, because there's something about literally physiologically in our body, once we listen to it and let it kind of like freak out a little bit, it starts to calm. And then we get to tell it the truth. So I had this moment where all of a sudden my a core fear was triggered of, they're going to see me, they're not going to like me, they're not going to love me, I'm going to be left alone. I needed to listen to that and hear what it had to say. My little 8-year-old self, allow my nervous system to jitter a little bit. And as it jittered and talked, came to came down, came to a calm place, and then I got to tell it what I know to be true because I have data on both sides. And y'all, this is the thing. 8-year-old Christene has data that her dad yelled at her. And 30-year-old Christene has data that her dad hasn't yelled at her in probably 20 years. So, who's going to win? What's going to win? If I don't tend to my nervous system and tend to 8-year-old Christene, that narrative is going to be more true and more loud inside me than 20 years of data changing that. It is so important that 8-year-old Christene gets tended to. Otherwise, 8-year-old Christene is going to have a louder voice. She's going to have the microphone. And so there's something almost about putting to bed and putting to rest. It's like soothing and quieting down these upset little kids in us. Each one of us has many, many little kids in them that haven't just gotten the care that they need. So with this whole question of what is reality and what are the stories, how much of reality is shaped by childhood? A lot of it is shaped by a childhood unless we go and tend to those memories. And then we get to choose the lens that we look at the world through now. Just like my sister was saying, she really chose who she wanted to be, and she's continuing to do that. But apart from going back to those moments in the past, that's the default. So we have to know our default beliefs about ourselves, the world, God, and our default behaviors. So it's like the internal default and then the external default, because there's very big difference there. Our default may look like codependence externally, but what is codependence actually rooted in? What is the internal belief about others and about ourselves? So there's some homework that needs to be done if we really want to grasp and grapple with real change. We have to understand the default and then craft a new target ideal. My sister had to ask the question of, well, who do I even want to be if I want to be different than that? And that's what's so exciting. What's the experience I want to have for my life? And we all get the power to choose. Viktor Frankl, who was in concentration camps in Germany, he said that the greatest of all human freedoms that can never be stripped away is the power of choice, the power to choose how to respond. And it starts internally. He didn't have much power in terms of the external response, but he had so much power on the internal response. And it starts there. It starts with us doing the internal work, and then we can choose something different externally. So with that,